Good afternoon. My name is Wilmarie Newton, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be answering questions as we go along, so you can type them into the question box. If you have further questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email them to me, and I will forward them to the appropriate person that can answer them. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under Professional Development. And now I'd like to introduce Patrice McCarthy, Executive Director and General Counsel for CABE.
Thank you very much, Wilmarie, and thank you to the candidates for Board of Education that have joined us this afternoon. I am delighted that you have chosen to engage in this very exciting journey that you are on. And I'm going to begin by giving you a little overview about our association, CABE, and the resources that you will be able to rely on if you are elected to your Board of Education. Then we'll talk a little bit about the role of a Board of Education and the individual members of the board. Then, but we're going to start by turning it over to the CABE president, Liz Brown. Liz is a member of the Waterbury Board of Education and has extensive experience at several levels of government as an elected official. So Liz's insights will be particularly valuable to you during this journey. Liz?
Thanks, Patrice, and hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time to join us this evening. I know if you're on the campaign trail, you're probably out doing many things, meeting people, door knocking, and just in general, being anxious. But I've been on the Board of Ed in Waterbury for 12 years, and I'm on the campaign trail right now as well. Our terms are 4-year terms in Waterbury. And my topic really was, time. What kind of time commitment is what does a board member, their time commitment entail? And I guess I would say overall, it's what you want to put into it. It's more than a meeting. You're going to get a meeting. You'll get the information for the topics on the meeting. But it really is a deeper dive and availing yourself of the issues that are facing public education, knowing your community, knowing the issues of your particular school district. So it's more than just showing up. Let's put it that way. I think the time commitment is important. And I think there's a lot of people around to help understand the issues that you are facing in school districts. CABE certainly is a great asset and has been available. I know many times in Waterbury when I was facing difficulties, I called CABE and explained the situation, and I was guided. So it's always good to know that you have a support system out there. I have to say, on the campaign trail, I would just really have you think about why you are doing this. People are going to say, well, why do you want to be a Board of Ed member? And I think it's important that you, kind of soul search or just say, why do you want to do it for personal reasons? Do you want to do it because, you want to change something in the school system? Or, deeper, you're passionate about public education, you're passionate about kids, and you want everybody to succeed. So I think when you put that in perspective, the why of what you're doing, the time commitment kind of follows. If you know that you really want to understand the issues and contribute to the solutions. It's so easy to get into a rut and say, oh, nothing changes, or, this isn't solved, we can't solve this issue. But I would say, yes, you can. And one of the tricks that I've learned, not tricks really, but one of the things that I've embraced is to go early to the meetings and say hi to everybody. How's your week? You really have to get to know your fellow board members as human beings, as people, what their concerns are. It really helps when you have to discuss hard issues. If you kind of have you just had a grandchild, or, you want a new house, or whatever the issue is, you build those relationships. If a board has strong relationships and respect for each other, then I think it's easier to deal with the problems that you'll face on the Board of Education. So I would recommend that you really get to know your fellow board members I know in Waterbury, we really try to act in a bipartisan way. We do have Democrats and Republicans, but I have to say, this board, it wasn't always this way, but currently we have a great board and everybody really respects each other and really tries to look at the issues facing our school district in a collaborative manner. We meet, every board district is different. In Waterbury, we meet twice a month, one for, depending on what the agenda is, the first Thursday and, I'm sorry, the first Thursday and the third Thursday. When I first got on the board, we met every Thursday. That was a time commitment, but we're glad that we ended up changing that because it was hard on staff to come every Thursday night, and I think it just gave, there were issues that we thought we had to address through a board agenda, and after reviewing it, we said this doesn't have to come before the board. You know, this doesn't. I mean, we were voting on, you know, whether or not kids could use the left hand of a playground. You know, I was like, why is that coming from for the board? That should be a principal's decision. I'm exaggerating, but those are kinds of the issues. So one thing I would suggest, look at the agenda and see really what is critical to go before the Board of Education. So at the workshop, staff is there to answer questions about contracts or curricula or policy, things that are upcoming. And then our other meeting is a voting meeting. It's the board meeting on the third Thursday. We do have public comment at both meetings, and to tell you the truth, it's been very interesting. We don't have a lot. Over the years, there have been a few controversial issues, and you'll face that. But I always found that if you have a relationship with the community to begin with and have trust, then things they can get antagonistic. I'm not going to fool you, they will. But I do think that if you have those relationships with the community and with your board members, it's easier to solve the solutions. I try to make it a point to go to the community meetings if we're invited, to be out there in the community and listen, be a good listener. And that's part of understanding what's facing your families and your children. In terms of, as I said, in terms of time, I think I do a lot of reading. We like to look at some of the current events, some of the controversial issues that Sheila will talk about in a little while on the agenda. And there are controversial issues that you have to figure out. How can you set up systems in place that you've already been able to kind of hash it out so that you don't get, surprised by some kind of an outpouring. We're in a political period, as you all know, and that's why I really appreciate the fact that you want to run for office. It could be daunting, because it is there are people who want to make politics part of our work. I think it's just to know the systems in place, really, and that takes time to see, what's working and what's not working. I've spent a lot of time over the past 12 years really engaged with CABE and the National School Boards Association, and I've learned so much. I mean, this is an unbelievable experience to be part of public education. That really is the foundation of our democracy. And, I think when we kind of think about it philosophically, I feel honored to really be able to be part of something so intrinsic to our democracy. So I think, in terms of time, I would just say, put your time that you can make sure that you understand the issues, you understand your community, and you understand your board members and your school district. I don't know if anybody had questions.
Any questions for Liz?
Not at this moment.
All right. Well, Liz, thank you very much. And your enthusiasm and commitment to service, not only at the local level, but your commitment to CABE and working at the state and the national level on behalf of all boards of education and their students is really commendable. Liz comes down to Washington with us when we go to lobby our congressional delegation every year. And that's all part of an additional commitment beyond the one that she originally signed up for when she ran for her local board for the first time.
That's
So
right.
thank you. So Connecticut Association of Boards of Education has existed for over 100 years, and we provide advocacy, professional development, policy services, and communication services to support boards of education. We're a nonprofit voluntary membership association, and it is actually the Board of Education that is a member of the association. So we advocate at the state and federal level based on positions that our members adopt each year. We provide a host of professional development opportunities. This webinar is one of those, but we also provide a convention in conjunction with the Superintendent's Association in November. We provide a new board member and leadership workshop in December, and then a host of both in-person and webinars throughout the year that address specific topics of interest to boards of education. We also have a policy service, so that we'll talk a couple of minutes about the board's policy role, but boards are not alone in trying to craft policies that comply with state and federal requirements from scratch. We support them in that work. And then communications, helping boards communicate with their communities and making sure that you're receiving communications from us with the most up-to-date information on a variety of hot education issues. So why do we have school boards? Well, in Connecticut, our Constitution provides that there will always be free elementary and secondary education in the state. And our legislature has delegated to our local and regional boards of education the responsibility for implementing the educational interests of the state. So you have a very important state level responsibility. Now, there are a variety of resources that you can look to when you want information, not just about your own school district, which if you're elected to the board, you'll be receiving from your superintendent and your central office staff, but there are also wonderful resources on the State Department of Education website. It's called edsite.com, and you can look at school district profile and performance reports for any district in the state. And that helps give you a sense of the condition of education statewide, not just in your district. You will become, when you're elected to the board, and I'm going to be optimistic, I'm going to use the phrase when you are elected, and you will become one of about 1,200 elected school board members in Connecticut. A vast majority of our board members are elected. In a few cases, they are appointed. And you will be working on behalf of the 513,513 students in the state of Connecticut, over 500,000 public school students. Boards of education serve as that critical connection to their community on behalf of public education. So when you become elected to the board, you represent all of the students in the community. And that's important to reflect upon as you're making decisions on behalf of all of those students. There are three key roles for boards of education. The most critical one is that you adopt, monitor, and modify policies. You are a policy-making body. Some of the policies are required by legislation. For example, the legislature has said you have to have a policy about homework. You have to have a policy about student discipline and transportation. Then there are many policies that are recommended. I'll pick an issue that I'm going to be talking about later this evening, and that is about book selection and challenges to curriculum materials. So many boards of education outline in their policies how parents or other members of the community can raise concerns about books in the library or curriculum materials that are used in the classroom, but also they have a policy about how that selection occurs. And that's done by the professionals in the district, the librarians and the school media specialists. You may not think about your local budget as a policy, but it really is your largest policy statement, because that's where the Board of Education sets the priorities for the community. We don't know of any community where the Board of Education feels they have all the resources they need to do all the programs and provide all the supports that they want for their students. So you have to prioritize. So you may decide to prioritize smaller class sizes. You may decide to prioritize more paraprofessionals in certain classrooms, or beginning foreign language in the elementary school. But those are all policy choices that you will be making when you develop your budget. And it's often said that it really is at least a full year to become fully oriented to the responsibilities of a Board of Education member, because it is a cyclical process. Boards of Education their staff starts developing the budget each fall, and then it is generally adopted by the board sometime in the winter or early spring. Sometimes there's a second round, because if the budget is not approved by the municipal officials, the board has to go back and look at that budget again, and unfortunately sometimes make cuts. You're also waiting at that same time to find out what is your level of state support for education. Until the legislature acts on the state budget, that is something that's still in play and adds an element of uncertainty. Now, your district administrators, particularly your superintendents, have a lot of experience dealing with these issues. So you're going to be able to rely on them, on your school business official, to help guide you through the process and know what the critical points are where you as a board have to make a decision. Because remember that as a board, you only have power when you come together in a legally constituted meeting. So when you get elected to the board for the first time, you may encounter community members in the grocery store, on the soccer field, at the football game, who will say to you, well, now that you've been elected to the board, you're going to change that bus stop, right? Or you're going to get rid of that third grade teacher that you know is not effective, or you're going to change the policy on X. Well, it's very important for you to remember that your response is, I hear your concern. If it's something that, have you talked to the classroom teacher about an issue? Have you talked to the principal? Because I, as an individual, can't make those changes. So those are issues that would have to come back to the full Board of Education. And that's something that I think every board member has encountered when they become elected. You have a critical role to help the community understand how they can have issues resolved. And it's not by you agreeing on the sidelines of the soccer field that you'll take care of it for them tomorrow morning. Your other major responsibility has to do with the selection and the evaluation of your superintendent. Hopefully you'll have a stable environment, but we do know that superintendents sometimes look to other positions, and there is a certain amount of turnover, less in Connecticut than in other states, actually. The tenure of superintendents in Connecticut is longer than in most other states. But again, there are supports available if you have to go through that process of hiring a new superintendent. But on an annual basis, you have a responsibility as a full board to evaluate the superintendent. And we advise boards that as a best practice, they should also be evaluating themselves, because the board and the superintendent are a leadership team, and your ability to work well together will reflect on the positive outcomes for students in your district. So you want to be always looking at that relationship, looking at how you as a board function, but also how you function in coordination with your superintendent. Liz, you want to say something? Unmute. You're still muted, Liz. Nope.
She's not muted. Let's see. Let's try again, Liz.
You should be good now, Liz.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Great.
I just want to add to that, Patrice. It's a great point that usually the board and the superintendent set goals in the beginning of the school year. so that when you get to the end of the school year and you do evaluate, you have kind of a barometer. You know, these are the goals that the superintendent set forth in conjunction with the board. And, you know, how's our progress? What did we do? How, you know, so I think it's important that you understand that you and the superintendent should be setting goals for the year, hopefully based on a strategic plan. That's in a live document. You keep looking at your key district indicators, and you always want to make sure that you're, you know, allocating the resources, as Patrice said, to the areas of priorities or the areas where you need improvement. So that's something I think a lot of districts, I think things would actually go a lot smoother if they, in the beginning of the year, set those goals and priorities.
Absolutely. Great point, Liz. So I've talked about the responsibility that you have as a board as a whole. Now, what about your responsibility as an individual board member? Well, you're going to want to understand your roles and responsibilities, and you're certainly engaging in that process tonight. Many boards of education actually have either the board members come to our new board member program, and they may also have a session with just their own board of education in their district, where either someone from CABE or someone from a law firm comes out and reviews the roles and responsibilities, not just for the newly elected board members, but for the entire board, so that you're all on the same page. We encourage boards of education, board members, to model civility. We actually, as an organization, adopted a resolution about 7 years ago that calls on officials at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, to model civility in their behavior. And that is clearly more important now than ever before, because our students are watching, and our ability to communicate with each other, to hear each other, including to hear views that may differ from our own, and then to come to a resolution as a body is very important. And actually, our National School Boards Association adopted the same resolution at our urging. It's also important that you follow best practices of boardsmanship. Listen respectfully to your citizens during public comment. Every Board of Education has a period of public comment, generally at the beginning of their board meeting. And it's important that the members of your community see that you are listening to them, not that you are going to respond and solve their problem in the moment, but that you hear their concerns and that your administration, if appropriate, will follow up with them at a later date. It's also important to listen respectfully to your colleagues, because that relates to the issue of civility. If you are going to be an effective public body, you have to be able to listen to each other. It's also important that you assume the role of advocate. You are an advocate for public education. That is a sacred responsibility. And it's particularly evident when you're working on preparing a budget. It's important to remember that if you are not advocating for the children in the district, there's not another body of local officials in your community that has that responsibility. That is your responsibility. And finally, it's important to conduct yourself with ethical principles. If you feel that there might be the perception that you have a conflict of interest on a certain issue, you certainly have the opportunity to recuse yourself from the discussion and the action on that issue. And that reflects positively on you as an individual board member. It also reflects positively on the Board of Education. You are embarking on a journey where you can be a leader. As Liz indicated, it's hard work, there's a time commitment, but it can be very, very satisfying. And we encourage you to take advantage of the resources that will continue to be available to you during your tenure on your Board of Education. Now, I have to apologize because I have to go to another part of the state and talk about a hot policy issue, and I need to be there by 7 o'clock. So I'm going to turn it over to Sheila McKay, and she is going to talk to you about some of the hot issues facing public education in Connecticut and to some extent around the country. Sheila?
Great. Okay, folks. Thank you for joining us this evening. Again, Sheila McKay. I do the government relations work for CABE. My specific role is specific title is Senior Staff Associate for Government Relations. I am responsible for lobbying at the state capitol and at the federal level as well. We just want to thank you for making that commitment to run for office. We know that it, as Patrice did go into, and Liz as well, that it is a considerable commitment of your time. So in terms of advocacy, in terms of the role in which you'll be responsible for, there are a number of issues regarding funding, regarding special education and mandates, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But in terms of advocacy, the ways in which CABE can help you do that work. You are a responsible advocate as you are elected to that position. Just as a reminder, I tell all school board members that not every member of the legislature serves on the education committee, so therefore they're not acting on these bills at the first shot. They are not, they need your input. They will not necessarily know how this will affect, how a particular piece of legislation will impact students, affect the running of the district, and so forth. So that's where the work of testifying and the work of just having the ear of your local legislator is very important. We do send out on a weekly basis during the legislative session a highlight, an advocacy highlight. So we give you the information that you need to be able to have these conversations, and we're always available if you need, further explanation on something. But we'll give you, the bill numbers, the status of the bill, a summary of the bill. That's at your fingertips. We hold breakfasts around the state. We break the state up, we happen to break the state up into 9 areas. So we hold informal breakfasts with legislators, school board members, and superintendents in the very early weeks of the session, and sometimes in some districts before a session starts. And we have a day on the Hill, kind of mid-session, so that you can further say to legislators, you proposed something in January, and we've talked about it a little bit at our district level, and this, do you realize this will impact students in our district in this way? So it's another opportunity. The area breakfasts are in districts. The day on the Hill is at the legislature, so it's kind of like, back at home and then at the legislature. And we prepare testimony for the Education Committee, the Children's Committee, the Environment Committee, whatever committee has a bill that impacts students and school districts. And if you need help with assistance with testimony in terms of issues you see coming forward, we'd be happy to help you understand the process and the commitment of your time in trying to testify before the Connecticut General Assembly. We work closely with the State Department of Education. We monitor their state board meetings. We have, I'm going to say, at least once a month or once every couple weeks meetings with, Patrice meets with the leadership of many of the education institutions, the department, the Superintendent's Association, the Principals Association, the two teachers unions, and I guess that's it in terms of those particular meetings. But we work well with those organizations. We do find that we do have common ground on some issues. We are even working on issues with Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, which is our counterpart in the municipal level. In terms of issues, I'll probably talk about 2 or 3 tonight because we don't have a whole lot of time, and you may have questions. And Will-Marie, feel free to stop me along the way if people are raising hands and questions and so forth. Education funding. So the education cost sharing formula, which is known as ECS funding, is the major set of funds that come forward from the legislature to the, or from the state, from the legislature to the local districts. That formula was last tweaked, I'll say, in 2017. 2017 was a unique year. That was the year that the Senate was split 18-18, and there was some understanding as to changes that needed to be made and were to everyone's benefit. So the formula made some changes in terms of winners and losers. So maybe not to everyone's benefit. I shouldn't, those two phrases don't go together. But there was some understanding as to the poverty issues, the wealth issues, the concentrations of poverty, the different ways in which the state looks at the funding formulas across the state. And there are also different funding formulas. There's funding formulas for special education, for charter schools, for magnet schools, for VOTEC schools. Well, they're not VOTEC schools. Your technical schools. So there's different ways that formula works. I guess I would say at the moment, the most recent legislation this past May made some changes with that 10-year commitment that passed in 2017 to fully fund districts. It made some changes to the speeding that up. So by 2025, districts that have been short on funds will be fully funded. Districts that are, by virtue of their population shifts, their student population shifts, any number of ways in which their district numbers have changed, any district that may see a decrease in funds, that while it was a 10-year commitment will be prolonged further. So that's to the benefit. So that's a very brief understanding of the education cost sharing formula. There is a special ed excess cost sharing formula. The special ed excess cost, I should say reimbursement formula, is for students in the state of Connecticut that that are of severe need. If your district, and the example I use in terms of numbers, if your district must spend, and it must, this is the law, 4.5 times average per pupil expenditure before we may seek reimbursement. So if your district spends $10,000 to educate a student, it doesn't, it spends more. Let's say it's $10,000. When your district spends over $45,000 to educate that student, they may then seek reimbursement from the state. If, as it happens through the years, the commitment at the state level, you are not getting back. If you spent over 45, let's say you spent 100, so therefore you would be seeking 65. That's not right. Oh boy, my math. You would be seeking 55 back. If you would expect to get that 55, you'd be mistaken. The state of Connecticut didn't fully fund that reimbursement grant. They funded it about 74, 70-ish% for a number of years. And that fluctuated. As I said, it's a reimbursement grant. It fluctuated on the number of students that were that you all sought reimbursement for. It fluctuated based on the amount of funds that came forward for the fund to begin with. So at this point, the state just 2002 made some changes to that formula in terms of a tiered reimbursement grant. So it's still, you still need to spend 4.5 times the average per pupil expenditure. But when then are getting the reimbursement, the tiered disbursement, I'll say, has been changed. While it was at one point, 74% across the board to all districts going back, it's now moved up in a tiered process to 85%, 88%, and 91%. And those tiers are based on the wealth of your town, and there's a formula for that. But it is up from 74%. It does allow more your district to receive more funding back to the district. So it is a benefit to every district. There is a task force at the state level on special education funding. That funding, that task force does have a subcommittee on funding that Patrice is chairing. The work of that committee began in the spring. Most recently, that subcommittee on funding had a meeting last week and looked at some recommendations they want to bring forward to the full committee. As you can imagine, it's to make sure the formula is continued to be funded, and for that matter, fully funded. And to look at establishing a special education weight within the ECS formula, because as I said, your district has to spend $45,000 to be able to seek reimbursement. So some districts are not spending that much on a student because their needs aren't as severe. So those students, that funding really comes within the education cost sharing formula grant. So this recommendation would seek to have some funding within the ECS formula weighted to go towards special education. They are looking at making sure that there still is and continues to be strong support for universal access to pre-K, so that all students have a foundation before they enter into the public pre-K system. And this universal access to pre-K certainly understands that it's a public and private partnership. There are public entities and there are private entities that are helping to educate our young toddlers, young students. And then it looks to, there's some other bolder recommendations in here to establish a model state contract for your students that are outplaced. There are significant costs in outplacements for your severe needs students. Some districts are paying over $200,000. I don't know, Liz, if you could tell members what, or tell candidates what your costs happen to, what numbers you continue to see? I don't know. Oh, there you go. Oh, we just need to take Liz off of. Yeah.
Okay, now?
There you are.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I think special education is something that every district is grappling with. I think in Waterbury, where we have a population of close to 18% are, designated as special needs. And out of that, I would say a good 8% are high end. Now you're talking about medically compromised students with feeding tubes and needing nurses round the clock and so forth. And then there is a high cost when people have to be outplaced. We try not to, most districts try not to outplace them, but when you do, it's because you just can't accommodate them. We have 2 students that we're paying $250,000 each because they're high needs. They're in special institutions. I mean, I'm glad to say that's not the norm because I hate to see children so compromised. But your districts will be faced with high-end children, and I think what the impact is that you pass a budget and then you get a child newly enrolled in your school district. And it's like, oh God, now we have a deficit, a hole in the budget of say $150,000. So those are the issues that you want to make sure your budget, you have a little reserve somewhere for these kinds of things, because not every mayor and board of aldermen or whatever wants to give you more money. So that's always a fight. But so I would say we are allowed to put a certain percentage of our budget in reserve, so, or carry it over, if you will. But this is a hot topic, and I think the more you understand it, the more. It's really heartbreaking when you have to work with the families though and see these children. So that's really the human side of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, that's true. That's true. So from special ed, I'll take you into a different area, which is the mandates working group that's going on. We have, Patrice has a role in that one as well. And that work has just begun. That law was, or that working group was just formed in the last legislative session. They are looking at medical billing practices. They're looking at a combination of some required forms at the State Department of Education level. They're looking at employee verification and how far back that might go, and a number of issues. The Connecticut Association of School Business Officials, those that pay the bills, that help create the budgets, are at the table with us, as are the superintendents and teachers unions. The conversation was really quite good just last week. So we're looking forward to moving that work along. That report is due in January of 25. But there are a couple of issues that they'd like to see get moved forward this session. So they're working as a group. So that's part of that group. We continuously continue. What's the word I want to say? We always work on not having mandates come forward at the local level for you all. The state may pass something that it mandates the entire school district do it, and we say, well, this doesn't impact Ashford the same way it impacts Waterbury. You need to understand what the issues are and what impact issues are. Many times we're able to pick up the phone or send a text or an email to someone and say, this bill is coming forward. Please reach out and testify. Please get the ear of somebody. Many times it's really, really well intentioned, and sometimes it ends up going forward. It just goes forward. There's such demand for something changing, and then later we have to continue to say, you pass that, it's unfunded mandate. We're really looking to make sure some funding comes along with that. And that's, another role we continue to do. And then we also talk about implementation. Once something's passed, how is it working in your district? What changes might need to be made? And that's where we advocate as well on a continual basis on that. There are a number of task forces, which I just don't have the time to talk to you all about. There's one on HVAC that started its work last year and did realize that some changes need to be made to the work that they're starting to do. In terms of your district's all having to look at its HVAC systems. And there were requirements that were a little too, coming up a little too quickly. So legislation this year said you're going to be able to phase those review of your HVAC systems a little further. Essentially, everyone was asking for assistance in reviewing your HVAC systems, and there just weren't enough professionals to do the work. And the legislature had to realize that. So there have been some changes there. So their work continues on HVAC. There are task forces. Well, there's an awful lot of task forces, but I'll maybe just simply mention in a quicker fashion. There is a task force on funding that's going to be going forward again in terms of looking at, I mentioned different funding formulas in the state of Connecticut. Yes, there's education cost sharing formula, but there's charters, there's magnets, there's VOTEX and VOAGs. And so they're looking at more inclusive ways of funding in terms of not having so many different pots of money out there. There are Title IX work groups that are going on. There are civic engagement groups that are going on. I mentioned special education. Teacher retirement is being looked at. And those are the hot ones that are in the offing. I am available for questions.
Well, now that everybody is totally overwhelmed, and you're going to get a quiz now on everything that was said about ECS and special ed and so forth, but it's a learning curve, and you don't get discouraged. It is a learning curve, and there are people who can really unravel the maze because it can get overwhelming. So we're here to answer your questions or just share your response to all this.
will also say, and Patrice mentioned it earlier, that Jody Goler, who's a former superintendent in Hamden, and I think in Region 14 as well, I'm not sure what his role was there, but we'll be doing the next seminar with Patrice on policy issues. So he's been working on some school climate legislation, not legislation, policy. He's been working on AI, he has established a policy for CABE for your districts. And we actually have a working group, an informal working group. It's not mandated by the legislature, looking into AI, and it's really it's quite interesting. But just know that if you want to listen in again, he'll be doing some talking about the policy work that CABE does.
So we don't have any questions at this moment, but I'll give it a minute or so, see if anyone wants to type any questions in.
Okay. I can't see where any of you are from either, so that, well, I mean, it's nice to have you. Doesn't matter.
You know, one other issue while we're waiting for questions, most of our districts have been benefited from the federal dollars that came to us from under the COVID crisis. And those dollars are ending within the next 2 years. If not, some of us have to spend it by the end of 25. So that's another area to look at, because there will be a cliff for some districts. I know in Waterbury, we've tried to augment our staff by hiring social workers and, mental health people. So that will be a burden. So that's where lobbying efforts are really going to make a difference, so that we can keep those funds to keep the progress that we have made.
Yes, I mean, we're definitely hearing from districts, not a lot yet, but we're definitely hearing from districts. And the State Department of Education has a new tracking system, a public tracking system specific to those dollars.
Right.
That's on their State Department of Ed website. I think it just launched last week, so that you can see specifically where your district is going in terms of, I believe there were 3 different grants and they ended at 3 different times. I think you're right, Liz. The last one is September of 25, I believe. There is also a couple of other issues. The kindergarten start date has been an issue. The department is looking at guidance, but it certainly hasn't been available at the start of this school year. It's going to take some time to have some guidance on that. But the legislature passed a law in this most recent legislative session, so that we were December 31st, January 1 of any school year, a student would be able to register if they turn 5 by then. It has now been changed, so it's September 1. You may very well have heard this issue if you're out knocking doors. It does impact, what we call your burr babies, your Septembers, your Octobers, your Novembers, your December babies. And those, that would be 1/3 of the population entering school this year. Many districts not having any particular guidance, there is a waiver that was put into legislation after the initial bill passed, that allows principals and school staff to make a determination as to whether a student is ready to go to school. So it is a local waiver process, and that state guidance is coming. But the law passed and went into effect quicker than I think districts thought that it might have. But I will say the state of Connecticut is unique to any other state in the nation in terms of having that December date. And this is legislation that has been debated for a number of years. And reading too, that was another issue, another big issue in terms of the state mandating a reading program. Districts have submitted their reading programs, and the department is reviewing those reading programs. So there'll be more to come on that issue as well.
Sheila, before we end, I would like to bring everyone's attention to the chat and as well as the handouts. I uploaded some documents for you guys to either print or take a look at on your screen.
Great. And I can go into more detail for anybody that wants to follow up with me, as Patrice can, as Liz can, whatever you, you all run with a different perspective, although we, want to make sure that you run as a unit once you, not run as a unit, that you act as a unit when you get into your position. You may not always see eye to eye, of course, but typically what we like to say is when the decision's been made, we hope that the board goes forward in a unified fashion. But that being said, any issue I've mentioned, I'd be happy to give anybody background on.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thank you, Sheila and Patrice. This certainly was very informative. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.
All right, folks, may your lawn signs stand straight. Bye.